Our top story comes out of China, where the death toll from the Wuhan coronavirus has now hit 106. Officials say more than 4,000 people are now infected, with over 30,000 in medical observation. More on that now in this report.
The Chinese government has sealed off entire provinces, isolating over 50 million people to curb the deadly coronavirus. Over 4,000 people are infected in China, with cases also confirmed elsewhere in Asia, Europe, and North America. The U.S. consulate in Wuhan is preparing to fly its diplomats and other Americans out of the country. Japan, Mongolia, France, and other governments are also preparing for evacuations.
As you know, we are in the process of evaluating the possibilities of repatriating French nationals. Some 100 French nationals who sometimes request it, obviously in conjunction with the other ministries, the armed forces, the interior, in order to prepare the operation as smoothly as possible.
U.S. President Donald Trump has offered to help China in combating the spread of the virus. But the National Health Commission of China said difficulties for the patients seeking treatment for the virus have decreased.
So these 10,000 available beds are sufficiently able to alleviate the needs of those infected and the suspected cases, including those showing symptoms of fever and have to be warded for further inspection.
The World Health Organization has also admitted its initial assessment of the threat was incorrect, saying it was high, not moderate. Symptoms of the disease include fever, cough, and breathing difficulties.
The World Health Organization has admitted its initial assessment of the coronavirus threat was incorrect, saying it was high, not moderate. This comes as China reports the first death from the virus in Beijing. The WHO says the risk of coronavirus infection is very high in China and high at the regional and global level. In a footnote to a new report published late on Sunday, the UN Health Agency said it incorrectly marked the global risk as moderate. The WHO spokeswoman, Fadela Shaib, says the only error was in the wording. The admission of this mistake does not mean the WHO is now declaring a global health emergency. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says no Pakistani in China has been infected by the new coronavirus. In an interview, he said all precautionary measures are being taken to safeguard the Pakistani community in China. The Foreign Office at Pakistan's embassy in Beijing is in touch with its citizens in China. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Imran Khan has ordered an inter-ministerial meeting to discuss preventative measures. In a notification, it is said the meeting will be attended by the Prime Minister's health advisor, the Foreign Office, and health ministry officials. Earlier, the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan, Lijian Zhao, also assured the safety and health of Pakistani citizens in China. In other news coming out of the U.S., President Donald Trump says his Middle East peace plan will be unveiled today. He was speaking alongside Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House. Trump said Palestinians would ultimately support his plan. Netanyahu says the peace plan may be the opportunity of a century. Meanwhile, dozens of activists have been protesting against Trump's peace plan outside a UN office in Gaza City. Earlier, Palestine's Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh urged the international community to boycott the plan. The UN Security Council has called for an emergency closed-door meeting today at Britain's request over a fresh outburst of fighting in Yemen. Battles between the government coalition and Houthi rebels have increased, killing hundreds over the past week. The US-backed Arab coalition stepped up its airstrikes on rebel targets in Sana'a, while Houthis began shelling government-held areas. Houthi officials say the coalition launched 29 airstrikes targeting the front lines at Sana'a, Al-Jawf, and Najran. They claimed significant gains with the capture of the strategic road linking Ma'rib with the border province of Al-Jawf. Yemeni Prime Minister Ma'in Abdul Malik Saeed says his government will confront the Houthi advances. Meanwhile, the UN envoy for Yemen, Martin Griffiths, says the combatants must reduce the violence and renew commitments to a peaceful resolution. The envoys of 16 countries with embassies in Baghdad have condemned the use of excessive violence by Iraqi security forces and armed groups. In a joint statement, envoys from countries including France, Britain and the US called for a credible investigation into hundreds of deaths since October. They said despite Iraqi government assurances, security forces and armed groups continued to fire live rounds at peaceful demonstrators. The envoys said protesters have also faced intimidation and abduction. They called on Iraq to respect the rights to freedom of assembly and peaceful protest. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says ties between Tehran and Moscow are growing despite U.S. pressure. Rouhani met the chairman of the Russian Assembly's lower house, Vyacheslav Volodin, in Tehran. The president said bilateral agreements are being implemented and the two countries' parliaments can help develop ties. He also hailed Moscow's stance over the assassination of Commander Qasem Soleimani. Rouhani said joint maneuvers between Iran, Russia and China mean that the three countries are determined to have closer relations. Volodin said Tehran-Moscow ties are in a good momentum and the Russian Assembly will help implement the government's decisions. Despite the ongoing crisis in bilateral ties, Russia and the EU are drafting 7 programs for cross-border cooperation. The plans will be effective for a 7-year period from 2021 till 2027. Russia's permanent representative to the EU, Vladimir Shizov, says Moscow's relations with the bloc have never completely frozen. Shizov said unilateral restrictive measures imposed by the EU against Russia do not apply to cross-border cooperation. Russia is currently liaising with 6 EU nations, including Poland, Lithuania, Finland and Sweden. The EU has warned Britain it will never compromise on the integrity of its single market. The EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, was speaking at Queen's University, Belfast. Barnier termed the single market bloc's most valuable asset and said frictionless trade between the UK and the EU was impossible. He said London must now face reality after underestimating the costs of leaving. He said Brexit bears negative consequences and will always be a matter of damage limitation. Barnier said if no trade agreement is reached, Britain still faces the risk of a cliff-edge Brexit in 2021.
Negotiating the future partnership between the EU and the UK is so another huge challenge. A new clock is ticking. 11 months is extremely short. Prime Minister Johnson has said he will not extend this period.
Well, it's the final week in Brussels for the 71 British members of the European Parliament. It's a painful time for those British MPs who believed in the European Union, but for those who believe in Brexit, it's a moment of victory.
Labour Party delegation leader Richard Corbett has been a member of the European Parliament since 1996. Now the British Prime Minister Jeremy Corbyn's Brexit plans have fallen into place. Corbett's run in Brussels is ending on midnight this Friday. He terms the Brexit campaign that won the 2016 referendum one of the most dishonest in the UK's political history.
I was first interviewed on this very bench 20-something years ago, so to come back here in a way to end it off is a very special moment. The next few days I'm packing up my boxes, I'm making, sadly, my staff redundant. I'm beginning to think what I might do for the future, but I've not decided yet.
Brexit Party MEP Claire Fox has a different take on matters. She says the European Parliament is too inefficient at legislating and sees the unelected European Commission's role in the EU as undemocratic. For her and other Brexit Party MEPs, this is a historical victory for their country.
Of course, I'm pleased because now I feel that people will at least feel the first stage has happened. You know, we will have technically left the European Union, and we decided to do that a long time ago. So, of course, I'm relieved at that.
Pro-EU MEPs fear that with a right-wing government running the UK without the EU's regulations, environmental protection will be weakened and workers' rights watered down. But these battles must now be fought at home, not in Brussels.
Well, in New Zealand, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has announced the date for the next general election and her bid for a second term. The country will also vote in referendums on the divisive issues of legalizing cannabis and euthanasia. Ardern's popularity soared after national and global praise for the way she handled the Christchurch Mosque's terrorist attack. But her popularity has taken a hit as the country's economy struggles with slow growth and low business confidence. At a news conference, Ardern said the government is working on New Zealand's long-term challenges.
As for us as a government, this year we intend to govern right up until the election is held, which today I can advise will be on the 19th of September. This election, I will be asking New Zealanders to continue to support my leadership.
Australia, meanwhile, has warned of a new rise in bushfires with predictions that soaring temperatures and high winds will make a return. Officials say the changing weather could reignite some fires and ignite fresh ones in the hard-hit eastern states. The New South Wales Rural Fire Service has told its communities to strengthen bushfire defences. In the meantime, thick hazardous smoke is covering the Australian capital, Canberra. Defence and emergency services officials are urged residents to be ready to evacuate. Since September, Australia has been battling bushfires that have killed 33 people and over 1 billion native animals. I'll be back after this break with plenty more news. Stay tuned. Welcome back. U.S. President Donald Trump has discussed developments in Syria and Libya with his Turkish counterpart Tayyip Erdogan. White House spokesperson Judd Deere said the two leaders discussed the need to eliminate foreign interference in Libya in a phone call. Deere said Trump and Erdogan emphasized on maintaining a ceasefire in Tripoli. He said both leaders agreed that the violence being carried out in Idlib must stop. During the phone call, the two leaders also discussed the situation in the eastern Mediterranean. The UN says the Sahel has seen a significant increase in violence against children as the insurgency rages across the region. UNICEF says in a report, 277 children were killed or maimed in Mali alone during the first 9 months of 2019.
The report said the number of children affected has doubled over the previous year, with nearly 5 million needing humanitarian aid. UNICEF says despite support from French and UN troops, Mali has been struggling to quell an insurgency that broke out in 2012. French Armed Forces Minister Florence Parly has warned the expected U.S. withdrawal from the region will make matters worse.
U.S. support is critical to our operations and that its reduction would severely limit our effectiveness against terrorists, but as it has been said, the decision is not yet made.
The conflict has since spread to the neighboring states of Burkina Faso and Niger, inflaming ethnic tensions along the way.
In northern Africa, meanwhile, 6 Chadian soldiers have been killed in an ambush blamed on Boko Haram in the volatile Lake Chad region. The army said 10 others were wounded in the intense attack on Tetewa Island in the lake. It said the soldiers were on patrol when they were ambushed near the town of Mandrari. Chad has seen an increase in militant attacks since the beginning of this year. On January 20th, a female suicide bomber killed 9 civilians in the village of Kaiga Kinjiria. Boko Haram was formed in Nigeria, but its attacks have spread to neighboring countries. The UN says it needs $730 million in humanitarian aid for Afghanistan this year to combat the country's surging poverty. The UN's Deputy Special Representative for Afghanistan, Toby Lanzer, said the growing poverty and the after effects of the 2018 drought have created the need for more aid. Lanzer said the UN hopes to hold another donors conference later this year to raise money for the 2021-2024 period. He says a ceasefire would greatly improve the state of farming, water resources, and education across Afghanistan. He added a peace deal would make it easier for the UN to work in areas where the government is not present. 9.4 million Afghans are in need of basic food and housing this year, up from 6.5 million in 2019. The UN asked for $600 million in aid from world governments and other sources last year. A British endurance swimmer has braved the freezing waters of East Antarctica to raise awareness on climate change. He's become the first person to swim under the Antarctic ice sheet, spending 10 minutes and 17 seconds under the freezing water.
This is W.HO, a celebrated endurance swimmer known as the polar bear. He swam a kilometer across a supraglacial lake in Antarctica in 0 degrees Celsius water with a wind chill of minus 15 degrees. Lewis called it the most frightening swim of his life, but also the most beautiful place he's ever seen.
The water had risen in that tunnel, and as I went in I realized it's not possible to swim crawl because I'm turning around all these corners, and it's very, very narrow. And then what was amazing were the colors.
Over more than 65,000 supraglacial lakes have appeared on the East Antarctic ice sheet in the past 3 years.
But what is very, very clear to us from the science is that we now need to create a network of marine protected areas around Antarctica. And the first one up for discussion is in East Antarctica. East Antarctica is the coldest place on this earth. It's an amazing place.
The region lost the same amount of ice between 2014 and 2017 as it had in the previous 30 years. W.HO, who is also a UN patron, hopes his epic adventure will draw attention to the Antarctic landscape while encouraging the world's leaders to protect it.
Let's begin business news with global stocks and oil prices, which are tumbling on fears of the new coronavirus in China that could damage the world's second largest economy. Investors have shifted their capitals to safe haven assets such as the Japanese yen and government debt, shoring up their prices. Pan-European markets slid over 1%, while stocks on Wall Street also followed the decline. U.S. stocks witnessed a plunge after Nasdaq had its biggest one-day decline since August last year, while the S&P 500 also posted its biggest daily drop since October last year. The Dow Jones closed lower for a fifth straight day in its longest losing streak since last August. Seoul's Kospi Index has plunged over 3%, while the Nikkei 225 is trading over 0.5% lower. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. For watching this bulletin here on Indus News.